This is the Unique Scotland podcast with exclusive ScottishVisits.co.uk.
Hello, this is John Harbour, and welcome to Unique Scotland, the podcast from my website, exclusivescottishvisits.co.uk. I'm speaking to you from my office in my hometown Helensburgh today, and that's normally where I do my recording. It's northwest of Glasgow and sits on the River Clyde. If I told you that the weather will make our distillery workers happy, you'll realise that heavenly fresh water is falling from the skies to fill the freshwater lochs from where the water to make our exquisite whisky will come from. It is September after all, and summer is officially over, so we can expect a little rainfall before winter really sets in. In today's podcast, we are heading from the wonderful Cromlix Hotel to Stirling, and on this trip the question is, what does Outlanders Jamie and Claire have in common with Monty Python's John Cleese and his fellow Pythons? We've just been staying in the world-renowned tennis player Andy Murray's hotel overnight at Cromlix, and now we are going to visit his hometown of Dunblane, where we'll find gold-coloured letterboxes. Well, what's all that about? And sadly, the town itself is remembered for a massacre of schoolchildren 24 years ago, and we'll talk about that. We'll go on to Stirling, passing the amazing memorial of that great Scot, William Wallace, and hear of two of the greatest battles during the 13th and early 14th centuries as medieval Scotland fought for independence. This podcast is the third in my Loch Lomond to Stirling trilogy, and is the third series of touring podcasts that help you explore Scotland's beautiful landscapes, lochs, glens, and its history. What I try to do on these virtual journeys is to share with you all that Scotland has to offer, and if you intend to visit this wonderful country at some stage in the future, perhaps your tour might be shaped by some of what you discover here. And do please visit my website at www.exclusivescottishvisits.co.uk to hear more of my tours and also see some of the wonderful photos I've taken associated with all my own journeys around Scotland. Well, thank you to the listeners who enjoyed my last podcast on the Trossachs, and Dan from Queensland, Australia. There really is a Loch Drunkie in Scotland. I didn't make it up, and now you know where the name came from. Another questioner asked which animals are extinct in Scotland. Well, sadly, there are many, but the main ones that you will relate to, especially in the USA, I think, are the bear and the wolf. Actually, there has been a suggestion in Scotland that wolves should be reintroduced to keep the deer population in check. Well, if I was a wolf, and there were 7 million sheep wandering around the hillsides, I doubt if I would use too much energy chasing fast-moving deer over the mountains. I'm just saying. Well, whatever way you intend to enjoy Scotland, then I hope that by listening to this podcast and by viewing my monthly video podcast, you get a feeling for what this magical land of the Scots has to offer. So I'd now like you to relax wherever you are and thoroughly enjoy the third part of your Unique Scotland tour from Loch Lomond to the Trossachs. If you're at home and enjoying a wee dram, then I raise my glass to you with a traditional Gaelic Scottish toast, Slàinte. It's a glorious day, and we leave the fabulous Cromlix Country House Hotel, driving along the daffodil-strewn single-track road to connect with the main road down to Stirling. The topography here is lush green, gently rolling hills, and a few miles from the Cromlix Hotel we cross a small, single-lane bridge that is spanning the Allen Water, a small river that runs south to join up with the River Forth. The bridge makes me smile. There's a sign saying Weak Bridge, and I always ask myself, how weak is weak? So it's with some trepidation that I drive over, and I always breathe a sigh of relief when I get to the other side. It's not long until we arrive at the small hamlet of Kinbuck. It's tiny, and it's one of those blink and you miss it villages. There's a row of neat bungalows along the left-hand side of the road, and the River Allen is on the other. Surprisingly, the grass on the river side is neatly trimmed down to the riverbank, and there are baskets of flowers along the road as well. It's very sweet, and this is typical of so many small villages in this part of the world. Kinbuck does have a claim to fame in that it was the place where Jacobite troops under the command of the Earl of Mar gathered after their defeat at the Battle of Sheriffmuir in 1715. Sheriffmuir is about 3 miles to the east of Kinbuck village and was one of the crucial battles in the Jacobite saga. The 15 and 45 are often quoted, and that refers to this Battle of 1715 and the final Culloden Battle of 1745. This one started when John Erskine, 6th Earl of Mar, mustered the Highland chiefs on 6 September of that year and declared James Stewart, or James VIII, or the Old Pretender, as King of Scots. You may remember from previous podcasts that the Jacobite Rising started in 1689 after James VII was forced to abdicate and King William of Orange came to the throne, a bloodless coup effectively. Well, William, or King Billy as he is known today, met James VII in Ireland in 1690 at the River Boyne, and the Battle of the Boyne aftermath rattles down the historical corridors, especially in Ireland. James VII returned to his exile in Italy, and that was that, until, that is, he died, and his son James VIII, still in exile, organised an uprising in Scotland, culminating in the Battle of Sheriffmuir in 1715, the site of which is so close to Kinbuck. So with the 6th Earl of Mar leading the charge, he raised an army of about 12,000 men and quickly took Perth, which meant that he commanded much of the Northern Highlands. There were a number of unsuccessful skirmishes with the leader of the government forces under the command of the 2nd Duke of Argyll, who was based at Stirling, but they came to nothing. Eventually, Mar left Perth and headed south, and Argyll was waiting for him on Sheriffmuir, east of Kinbuck and just north of Dunblane, and that's a town I'll talk about shortly. The date was the 13th of November 1715, and the second main battle of the Jacobite rebellion was about to commence. Argyll, with only 4,000 troops, was seriously outnumbered, but the head-on, hand-to-hand fighting raged most of that day, and somehow the government forces were able to hold the line, with no clear breakthrough from the Jacobites. At the end of the day, both armies were considerably depleted, with many dead littering the battleground. In the end, the battle was inconclusive, with both sides claiming victory. There was clearly no outright victor, and both sides had held their ground and then retired. And retiring at the end of the day meant, in strategic terms, the Jacobite advance to Stirling had been halted, and although undefeated, the Jacobites were left demoralised, and the French and Spanish soldiers fighting for the Jacobite cause, well, they withdrew their forces, leaving Mar no alternative but to give up the fight. Neil Oliver, the Scottish archaeologist and TV commentator, as well as the honorary president of the Scottish Tourist Guide Association, commented on the action. He suggested that the Jacobite failure of the Rising of 1715 was astonishing, in that the leader, the Earl of Mar, could have easily moved past the Duke of Argyll to link up with English Jacobites in the north of England. Clearly, Mar's generalship as well as military leadership is called into question, and Neil Oliver states that Mar may have succeeded if he'd had the merest sense of how to fight a campaign rather than lead a parade. Strong words indeed, Neil, but I have to agree. James VIII, for whom Mar was fighting, did land in Scotland at Peterhead that December, but by then the cause was lost. He met with Mar but was unable to rouse the disheartened army. James VIII returned to France, never to see Scotland again. Well, the follow-on to the story, which I'll tell at length in another podcast when I cover the Battle of Culloden, is the arrival some 30 years later of his son, Prince Charles Edward Stuart, or commonly known as Bonnie Prince Charlie. But that is for another podcast, another day. We drive down from Kinbuck, passing through the small village of Ashfield, and arrive at Dunblane. Now, many of you may have heard of Dunblane for reasons good or bad, and I'll go into that story shortly. The town itself is sometimes called a city because of the fabulous cathedral at its centre. It has a population of about 10,000 and growing all the time, as it's a very pleasant town with easy rail and motorway access to Stirling and Edinburgh, and the River Allen mentioned before runs right through the middle of the town. As you've learned from my previous podcast, the Gaelic word Doune means fort or castle, and the name of the town is supposedly derived from Saint Blaine, an early Christian saint of the late 6th century, thus Dunblane. He would appear to have come from the west coast and the Isle of Bute, and his followers are believed to have founded a church at Dunblane. The earliest evidence of Christianity in Dunblane are two grave cross slabs of the 10th and 11th centuries, which are preserved in the cathedral. The cathedral itself has an 11th century bell tower and 13th century choir and nave. The Scottish Reformation in 1560 saw the nave roof being removed and the choir section being retained as the parish church, a practice common throughout Scotland, and we saw that in Dunkeld in previous audio and video podcasts. Well, although the cathedral today is relatively modest in scale, its refined architecture is to be much admired, and with its setting overlooking the valley of the River Allen, is a must if visiting the area. Very sadly, the 20th century imposes itself on this serene place, and inside the cathedral there's a memorial to 16 children and one of their teachers who, unbelievably, were victims of a shooting massacre in 1996 at Dunblane School by a local man who shot them dead in the primary school's gymnasium before killing himself. Not a happy event to record on a podcast, but I do this in memory of those that lost their lives that day. Turning to the town itself, in the 19th century, Scotland went through a bit of a boom in the hydropathy movement, where Victorians would take the waters and exercise for good health. Dunblane and the Bridge of Allen, the village next door, and we'll pass through that on our way to Stirling, were the locations of successful hydropathic establishments. Well, as you drive around the town, you will see a gold-coloured postbox. Now, postboxes all over the UK were painted gold if a winner of an Olympic gold medal lived in the vicinity. Now, the gold box in Dunblane is attributed to the world-famous tennis star Andy Murray, whose family live in the town and who now owns, as we've seen, the fabulous Cromlix Hotel. Andy won gold medals in the men's singles in London Olympics in 2012 and also in the Rio Olympics in 2016. We leave the town of Dunblane, and as we do, we pass the gates to Queen Victoria's School, a co-educational boarding school for children of British Armed Forces personnel. The idea for the school emanated as a memorial to the Scottish dead of the Boer Wars, and those were the wars fought between the British Empire and the South African Boer States in 1899 to 1902. After Queen Victoria's death, it was thought fit to name it in her memory. Money was raised from Scottish servicemen and the people of Scotland to complete the project, and Queen Victoria's School was opened on the 28th of September 1908 by King Edward VII. If you've read my bio on the ESV website, you will realise that I am a Royal Navy veteran, and I'm pleased to say that my own son Paul went to Queen Victoria's School. The boys wore kilts and had to participate in either piping, drumming or Highland dancing, and Paul was a Highland dancer. I was a very proud dad, watching him dance in the Edinburgh Military Tattoo a number of years ago. The highlight for me, though, was taking a helicopter into the grounds of the school from my ship HMS Edinburgh that was operating in the River Forth at the time. I often wonder if the experience for some of the boys going up in that helicopter then prompted any of them to join the armed forces. Before we move on to the Bridge of Allen, another village famed for its hydropathic establishments, we take a detour of about 3 miles to the west to see Doune Castle, a fabulous ruin of a castle famous for dastardly deeds in Scottish history, and more recently for a part in Monty Python and the Holy Grail film, as well as the most recent filming of the blockbuster series Outlander. The town of Doune is dominated by the late 14th century Doune Castle, and I'll talk about that shortly. The town itself dates back thousands of years and is known for its many burial mounds and standing stones in the area. Doune is also well known for its Roman remains dating from the 1st to the 3rd centuries in Scotland, and the town's also known for its pistol manufacture, and as you enter the town you'll see signboards with crossed pistols to remember its historical connection with this weaponry. As I said, the town is dominated by the medieval stronghold Doune Castle that sits on a wooded bend next to the River Teith. When you're driving from the south, you cross a bridge over the River Teith, and if you look over to your right, you can see the castle in all its glory at the river's edge. You can tell from the size of this castle that it had royal connections. Originally built in the 13th century, it was damaged in the Wars of Independence, and then rebuilt in its present form in the late 14th century by Robert Stewart, Duke of Albany, and one of the younger sons of King Robert II of Scotland. There are 3 parts to the castle's story for the visitor to Scotland, and it's visited for very different reasons. Clearly there is the historical element, and its bloody history is fascinating on its own. However, the castle was also used in the filming of Monty Python and the Holy Grail, and also the Outlander series. Whenever I have guests looking specifically at a film location, I like first to explain this fascinating castle's history before going on to the fictional tale of later use. I could actually do a podcast on the history itself, but in simple terms, Robert and Duke of Albany used this castle as his stronghold and effectively ruled Scotland as the regent due to the infirmity of his father, the king. On the king's death, James I became king, but was just a boy, and sadly was captured by the English and a ransom was demanded. Well, Robert was thoroughly enjoying being the temporary king and did not work too hard to raise the money to buy back James, his true king. Indeed, he never raised the money and died before James I was released. It was Robert's son, Murdoch, who finally paid the ransom, and James I returned to Scotland, 18 years later. Well, James I took immediate retribution on the new Duke of Albany and his own sons, and he had them imprisoned and executed soon after. Doune Castle thereafter became a royal possession. It was used as a royal hunting lodge and dower house and was given over to the Earls of Moray in the 16th century. The castle saw military action during the War of the Three Kingdoms and also during the Jacobite Rebellion. By 1800 the castle was ruined, but restoration works was carried out in the 1880s prior to it passing into state care in the 20th century. Well, the castle consists of a large tower house and a separate tower containing the kitchen and guest bedrooms, and is joined by a great hall. There's a large wall to the rear of the castle containing a courtyard that would have had ranges of buildings within. The stonework is almost all from the late 14th century, although restoration work of the 1880s replaced the timber roofs and the internal floors. It was no wonder, therefore, that such a well-preserved treasure from the 14th century should be used by filmmakers of the 20th and the 21st century. I'm sure that most of you will have seen the Monty Python film, and in one of the sketches, King Arthur and his men, equipped with coconut shells to replicate the sound of horses' hooves, go on a search of the Holy Grail, which brings them to a number of different castles, most of which are actually Doune Castle but from different angles. When the knights arrive at the castle, it's occupied by French soldiers who claim to have the Holy Grail and taunt the Englishmen before driving them back with a barrage of farmyard animals, and they throw them over the castle walls. Bedivere, the English king, takes the initiative and builds a Trojan rabbit to sneak into the castle. Well, the ploy works. They knock on the door and the huge wooden rabbit is taken into the castle by the French. However, no one is hidden inside the rabbit, and the French catapult the rabbit back over the wall at the knights. If you've not seen the film, then I do recommend it. It will split your sides. The most recent filming here was the series Outlander, which is a historical drama television programme based on the novels of Diana Gabaldon. My claim to fame is that I met Diana in Stirling Castle a couple of years ago. In actual fact, I'd gone to see the famous TV celebrity Neil Oliver, who I mentioned earlier. I was following his film series on Scotland. When I turned up at the Great Hall of the Stirling Castle, it was packed, and mainly with women, and I thought to myself, how lucky is this Neil Oliver with so many groupies? As it turns out, most of the ladies were keen followers of Outlander and were there to see Diana Gabaldon. Sorry, Neil. The series revolves around a World War II nurse, Claire Randall, and her husband Frank. During a visit to Inverness, she visits the standing stones of Craig na Dun, and on touching the central stone, she's carried back in time to 1743. She falls in with a group of Highlanders from Clan Mackenzie, and that is the connection with Doune Castle, which, as it happens, is the clan seat and stronghold of Clan Mackenzie. It is called Castle Leoch in the series, and there are some terrific shots both inside and out. Now, I'll be doing an Outlander series separately, so I'll leave it there for now and tell you more of Claire and the man she falls in love with in the past, Jamie Fraser. We get back on the road and pass through the town of Bridge of Allan, named, not surprisingly, after the bridge that crosses the River Allan. There used to be a hydropathic hotel called the Allan Water Hotel, but it closed many years ago and was turned into luxury apartments. As it happens, my in-laws bought one and lived there for many years. Their proximity to Queen Victoria's School ensured that my son was kept going with sweet parcels and anything else that he needed. It's interesting to see how towns develop over the years, and in the 19th century the town would have had a relatively small number of thatched cottages. By 1850 the local laird had a vision to turn the town into a hydropathic town and had a plan drawn up envisaging spacious streets with pleasure grounds in the woods. And his vision came to pass with the building of fabulous stone villas and wide roads. The local spa became well known for eminent visitors, and Robert Louis Stevenson was known to visit. As we leave the village and head south towards Stirling, the countryside opens up once more, but two features are quite distinct upon the horizon, and if you look on the right-hand side, it's possible to make out the wonderful Stirling Castle sitting proud on top of its extinct volcanic plug. Whereas on the left, similarly standing high and proud, is the Wallace Monument, and that's a huge structure to commemorate Scotland's most famous son, William Wallace. Made famous, of course, because of the film Braveheart, where Highland warrior faces were painted with the Scottish flag, the saltire, and that burst forth on the big screens, as well as bare bottoms at the invading English army. The Wallace Monument is a huge tower, constructed in 1869, and stands 220 feet or 67 metres tall, and built of sandstone in the Victorian Gothic style. It is superb, and you can climb to the top using a spiral staircase of some 246 steps. It sits on top of another volcanic plug called Abbey Craig, and that's named after Cambus Kenneth Abbey that used to be nearby. This Abbey Craig was the site of William Wallace's headquarters in 1296 before the Battle of Stirling Bridge, and he won this epic battle against overwhelming odds of King Edward I of England, known as Hammer of the Scots, and Wallace firmly established himself as protector of Scotland. The tower itself is not that old and was constructed following a fundraising campaign in the 19th century, and it was opened in 1862. It's open to the general public and leads up to a visitor's platform at the top, which provides superb views over the surrounding countryside, and also Stirling Castle a couple of miles away to the west, that can be seen as well. Inside the tower can be seen a number of artefacts believed to have belonged to Wallace, including his longsword, which is 5 feet 4 inches or 1.63 metres long. And you might remember from the Braveheart film how he used to tuck this sword down his back, and when any enemies approached, he'd just one flick of the arm and the sword would be there ready to defend his honour. On the outside wall, on the corner of the monument, is a fabulous original Victorian statue of William Wallace himself. It's huge and stands out as a testament to this grand memorial to the great man. Well, having climbed to the top and back, again with some wonderful photos in the bag, we head west now towards Stirling. It only takes 15 minutes and we enter the town and head up the cobbled streets of the old medieval town to find the castle sitting high and proud on its own extinct volcanic plug, not dissimilar to Edinburgh Castle. Stirling is a city with a population of about 95,000. Like Edinburgh, a medieval town grew up on the crag leading down from the fortification that has stood on this site for thousands of years. The stone castle that stands there today dates from the 12th century, with 15th and 16th century buildings within. The castle is surrounded by rich farmland with fast-flowing River Forth to the east and mountains to the west, and this has proven important strategically for hundreds of years. It has been said that Stirling is like a huge brooch. It's clasping the Highlands and the Lowlands together, and he who holds Stirling holds Scotland. Before the 19th century, Stirling's key position as the lowest bridging point on the River Forth, before it broadens towards the Firth of Forth, made it a focal point for travel north and south. And as I mentioned previously, a vital point in the Battle of Stirling Bridge fought between Wallace and Edward I. Stirling used to be the capital of Scotland and a favourite refuge for kings and queens down the centuries. Not far from the castle is a 12th century medieval church, the Church of the Holy Rood, and it was here that the infant James VI was anointed King of Scots just after his mother, Mary Queen of Scots, was forced to abdicate. Of course, James VI of Scotland would go on to become James I of England when Elizabeth I died in 1603, thus joining the crowns of Scotland and England. And it's rather ironic that after hundreds of years of subjugation by the English, who expended huge effort, money and armies to gain the Scottish crown, it was the Scots who produced a king that took the English throne without a shot being fired, and it has been thus ever since. A visit to the castle is a must, and is quite spectacular both from a distance and close up. It is one of the most favoured homes of Scottish kings and queens from the 12th century, providing comfort and security. However, its strategic position meant that it was one of the most besieged castles, and, as I mentioned before, the place of two of the most important battles in Scotland's history. The Battle of Stirling Bridge in 1296, fought by William Wallace, and the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314, fought and won by King Robert the Bruce. More of these battles in later podcasts, and the castle will get a separate podcast with a tour in and around the castle. As we leave the castle and start to wind up this podcast, it's worth noting a fabulous statue of King Robert the Bruce himself just in front of the walls of the castle. He's facing south, and it's clear that he's looking across to Bannockburn, the site of his greatest victory that brought relative freedom to Scotland and a permanent crown to the Stuart dynasty for hundreds of years. Well, I've come to the end of this third part of my Loch Lomond to Stirling trilogy, and I hope you have enjoyed our trip. There's more on William Wallace and Robert the Bruce to come in future podcasts, and I look forward to interviewing Lord Bruce, a direct descendant of our most famous king. To complement the Trossachs section of this podcast trilogy, I will be releasing a video covering Aberfoyle, the Duke's Pass and Loch Katrine, so watch out for that in coming weeks. And if you've subscribed on my website, www.exclusivescottishvisits.co.uk, you will be informed automatically. My next podcast is my monthly letter from Scotland, and that will be published next Friday. There's been a lot going on in Scotland's news, so tune in for that episode. If you'd like to hear any of my previous podcasts, you can find them on my website, at Exclusive Scottish Visits, or the usual channels such as Spotify, Google, TuneIn, Apple, etc., under my brand name Unique Scotland. I've also visited all the places I talk about and have put up some lovely photographs and videos of those places on my website, so do have a look. Also, please get in touch if you've any queries, clarification, or some subject that you'd like me to cover in the future, or perhaps just send an email to say hi. Well, it's time to sign off, and as I relax in the sumptuous surroundings of the Stirling Highland Hotel, I would like to raise my glass to you, wherever you are in the world, and give you the Gaelic toast, Slán Java.
You've been listening to the Unique Scotland podcast with exclusivescottishvisits.co.uk. To receive all our episodes automatically, please subscribe now.